Someone walked into an elderly woman's home. They did not break a window. They did not trigger an alarm. They got in, they got to her, and they got out. And in the chaos of what happened inside that house, they made one mistake. A mistake so small, so invisible, so completely beneath their awareness that they could not have known they made it even if they were trying to be careful. They left behind a single strand of hair. Not blood. Not fingerprints. Not a weapon. A hair. The kind of thing that falls from a human head 50 to 100 times every single day without a single conscious thought. The kind of thing that lands on a pillow, drifts to a floor, catches on a surface, and disappears into the background of ordinary life. The kind of thing that, for most of forensic science's history, investigators would collect, bag, label, and quietly set aside because there was simply nothing useful they could do with it. Here is what needs to be known before anything else. By the time this is over, the full picture will be clear. Exactly why the person who walked into Nancy Guthrie's home may have already made the one mistake that cost them everything. Why a strand of hair that would have been thrown away 10 years ago is now the most powerful piece of evidence in this entire investigation. And why the FBI, not the local sheriff, not the private lab, the FBI, is now involved in a way that should terrify whoever took her. Stay with this. Because what follows is going to change the way the science of criminal investigation looks. It is going to reframe every decision made in this case. And it is going to make one thing unmistakably clear. The person who took Nancy Guthrie is not as invisible as they believe. But before the science, before the FBI, before the laboratory in California that is about to become the center of this entire story, Nancy herself needs to be understood. Because none of what follows means anything without knowing who she was and what was taken from her family the day she disappeared. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She lived alone in Tucson, Arizona, in a home that was hers, that she had maintained and occupied on her own terms, the way people of her generation tend to do. Quietly. Independently. Without asking for much and without expecting trouble. She had health conditions that made walking difficult, the kind of physical limitations that accumulate slowly over a long life and that most people that age manage privately, without complaint, without drawing attention to their vulnerability. She was still in her own home. Still keeping her own schedule. Still the kind of woman who woke up every morning and moved through her day on her own terms. Until she did not. The details of what investigators found when they responded to her home are the kind of details that do not leave the imagination once they arrive. There was blood at the front of her property. Not inside, hidden from view, at the front. Visible. Marking the place where whatever happened to Nancy Guthrie began. And Nancy herself was gone. Not confused. Not wandered off in the way that headlines sometimes euphemistically describe when an elderly person goes missing. Gone, in the way that blood at the entrance of a home means gone. Taken. Removed. By someone who came to that house with a purpose. Think about what that requires. An 84-year-old woman who cannot walk easily in her own home, on what should have been an ordinary day. For someone to remove her from that house, they had to get close to her. They had to make physical contact. They had to overpower someone whose body was already fighting the ordinary battles of age, and they had to do it forcefully enough that blood was left behind at the entrance. That is not a quiet crime. That is a violent one. And wherever violence happens between two people in close physical proximity, biology gets left behind. Nancy Guthrie's family has been waiting for answers since the moment they realized she was missing. A daughter waiting. Other family members waiting. All of them living inside the specific, particular torture of not knowing, which is a different kind of suffering than grief because grief at least has a shape. Not knowing has no shape. It has no edges. It just continues, day after day, while the investigation moves at the pace investigations move and the world outside keeps turning as though nothing has stopped. Something has stopped. For that family, everything has stopped. And the person who caused that, who walked into Nancy Guthrie's home and walked out again and left her family in that suspended, shapeless anguish, left behind a strand of hair. And they have absolutely no idea what that means now. Now comes the part of this story where the investigation becomes complicated. And the complication matters, because it explains why 2 months passed before the most powerful forensic tool in the world was pointed at the evidence from this case. And that explanation is not comfortable. News Nation correspondent Brian Enton was the first to confirm what sources close to the investigation had been sitting on for some time. Strands of hair found inside Nancy Guthrie's home, collected during what are believed to be the initial phases of the investigation, had been sent to the FBI for advanced analysis. Enton's reporting was specific and it was sourced. This was not speculation dressed up as news. This was confirmed information that immediately raised a question nobody covering the case had thought to ask before, because nobody knew there was hair to ask about. The hair had not been publicly disclosed. Its existence, its collection, its presence in the evidence chain, none of it had been part of the public conversation about this investigation. And the moment it became public, everything shifted. Because hair, specifically the kind of hair most likely found inside that house, is not ordinary evidence anymore. It has not been ordinary evidence for several years now. And understanding why requires understanding a decision that was made at the beginning of this investigation that is now drawing significant scrutiny. When investigators first processed the scene inside Nancy Guthrie's home, they collected DNA evidence. What they found was not clean. What they found was what forensic scientists call a mixed sample. Multiple people's genetic material layered on top of each other at the molecular level. This happens when a surface has been touched by more than one person over time. A doorknob, a countertop, bedding. Any surface where different people's biological material has crossed paths and blended together in a way that makes separation extraordinarily difficult. A mixed DNA sample is not just complicated, it is one of the hardest problems in all of forensic science. It requires sophisticated, iterative analysis. Multiple rounds of processing. Technology specifically designed for separation. And even with all of that, results can still come back inconclusive after months of work. The Pima County Sheriff's Office made a decision. They handed the DNA evidence to a private laboratory in Florida. This is important to understand clearly. The Florida lab is not a questionable operation. It is reputable. It is certified. Law enforcement agencies across the country use it and rely on it for serious cases. The decision to use it was not inherently wrong. But it was a decision that would become the center of a significant and growing controversy. Because it meant the evidence did not go directly to the FBI. And the FBI, as it turned out, had strong opinions about that. But the mixed DNA sample was not the only thing collected from inside Nancy Guthrie's home. This is the detail that Brian Enton's reporting brought into the open for the first time. The detail that changes the shape of this investigation entirely. There was hair. Strands of hair found inside Nancy Guthrie's home have been confirmed to have been sent to the FBI for what is officially being described as advanced analysis. That phrase, advanced analysis, is not bureaucratic language. It is a very specific signal about what investigators believe this evidence might yield and what they need to do with it. When the FBI receives physical evidence that a competent, certified private laboratory has already had access to, it is not a second opinion. The FBI does not get involved in state-level investigations to offer second opinions. When the FBI steps in to handle specific evidence, it is because what needs to happen next requires a capability that the previous lab simply does not have. And the capability in question is one of the most remarkable developments in the history of criminal forensics. Here is the fact that most coverage of this case has moved past too quickly. A strand of hair with no root attached. Just the shaft, just the part that leaves a human head every single day without any conscious awareness, contains enough genetic information to identify a specific individual. Not approximately. Not probably. Specifically. Individually. With the kind of precision that holds up in a court of law. For decades, forensic science said that was impossible. Unanimously. Firmly. Without serious challenge. They were wrong. Understanding why requires understanding what the two different parts of a hair actually contain. When a hair is pulled forcefully from the scalp, yanked out in a struggle, ripped away by force, it comes out with the root attached. That root contains follicular tissue. And follicular tissue contains nuclear DNA, the full, rich, single-source genetic profile that forensic science has been using for decades to identify individuals. A rooted hair is straightforward evidence. Any certified lab can process it. It goes into a database and produces a result. A rootless hair is different. The shaft, just the strand itself, contains almost no genetic material by the standards that conventional forensic science was built around. What it does contain is mitochondrial DNA, which travels down the maternal line and is shared across entire family branches. Hundreds of people can share the same mitochondrial DNA profile. It can tell investigators that a hair did not come from someone in a particular maternal lineage. It cannot tell them with any certainty that it came from a specific individual. For criminal identification purposes, mitochondrial DNA from a rootless hair was considered forensically marginal at best. C.C. Moore knows this territory better than almost anyone alive. Moore is America's foremost genetic genealogist, the scientist who has built a career at the intersection of DNA technology and criminal investigation, who has worked on hundreds of cases, who has personally helped law enforcement identify suspects that conventional forensic science had no answer for. She has worked directly with the technology now being discussed in the context of this investigation. And when the news broke that hair from Nancy Guthrie's home was being sent to the FBI, Moore was direct about what it likely meant. The hair, Moore explained, is almost certainly rootless. If it had a root attached, the Florida lab would have processed it already. A rooted hair is standard analysis, well within any certified forensic laboratory's capability. The fact that this evidence is being escalated to the FBI, Moore noted, strongly suggests the lab encountered exactly what she had been hoping they might find: rootless hair. Hair shaft. The kind of evidence that, until very recently, investigators had no forensic use for. But that changed because of a scientist named Dr. Richard Ed Green. Green is a molecular biologist at UC Santa Cruz whose background was not in forensic science but in ancient DNA, the deeply degraded, fragmentary genetic material found in archaeological remains and fossils that had survived thousands of years of decay. Working with ancient DNA requires building methods for extracting usable information from genetic material that conventional techniques cannot touch. And it was that specific expertise, that experience making impossibly degraded DNA speak, that Green brought to the problem of the rootless hair shaft. What Green and his team developed was a method to extract SNP profiles from the shaft of a rootless hair. SNPs, single nucleotide polymorphisms, are tiny, precise variations at specific positions in the genetic code. They are not shared across family branches the way mitochondrial DNA is. They are individual. They are specific. And they are present in small but extractable quantities, in the shaft of a hair that has no root, no follicle, no tissue, just the strand itself. Pulling those variations out of that material required developing an entirely new process. A process the forensic establishment largely believed was not possible until Green's team proved otherwise. The company Green founded, Astrea Forensics, based in Santa Cruz, California, became the laboratory the FBI calls when rootless hair enters a serious investigation. CeCe Moore has worked with Astrea Forensics directly. She has seen the process from the inside. And she has helped solve 6 cases. 6 cases that had no other usable DNA evidence, using nothing but rootless hair processed through exactly this method. When Moore says this technology works, she is not speaking theoretically. She is speaking from direct, repeated, documented experience. And the FBI did not simply trust the science on faith. They tested it on one of the most scrutinized criminal cases in recent American history. Gilgo Beach. For over a decade, a stretch of highway on Long Island had been holding a secret. Bodies. Women, mostly young women who had been working as escorts, found wrapped in burlap sacks, disposed of along a desolate road near Gilgo Beach. The case was one of the most confounding in modern American criminal history. The killer had been careful. Evidence was minimal. Investigators had theories, suspects they looked at and moved past, dead ends that multiplied year after year. The families of the victims waited the way Nancy Guthrie's family is waiting now, in that shapeless, edgeless not knowing that has no bottom. Conventional forensics had produced almost nothing actionable. And then investigators went back to the evidence with new tools. Rootless hairs recovered from multiple victims. Hairs found on the burlap sacks on the victims' bodies in the locations where they had been left were sent to Astrea Forensics. Green's team extracted SNP profiles from those hair shafts. Profiles that the forensic establishment not many years earlier would have said did not exist in that material. Genetic genealogy was then performed. A process that takes a DNA profile and runs it against public genealogy databases where ordinary people have voluntarily uploaded their own genetic information. The matches that come back are not the suspect. They are distant relatives, third cousins, fourth cousins, people who share a common ancestor with the source of that DNA. Investigators build family trees from those matches, working backward and forward through generations, narrowing the field until the source of the original DNA can be identified. The trail led to Rex Heuermann's wife, to his daughter. Their hair, transferred to the victims, to the burlap sacks, to the locations where the bodies were found, had traveled from his home on his clothing into the crime scenes. It was damning evidence. A judge was preparing to allow it at trial. Rex Heuermann pleaded guilty. CeCe Moore has spoken about the Gilgo Beach case specifically in the context of what it proved, not just scientifically but legally. The judge's willingness to allow SNP evidence extracted from rootless hair set a case precedent that changed what investigators can do with this kind of evidence going forward. It is not experimental anymore. It is not theoretical. It has been tested in one of the highest profile criminal cases in the country and it held. And that precedent is now directly relevant to what is happening with the hair from Nancy Guthrie's home. Tracy Walder, former CIA officer and national security contributor who has been covering this investigation closely, has framed the significance of the FBI's involvement in terms that go beyond the forensic science. In any serious criminal investigation, Walder has noted, forensic evidence at a scene can be attributed to anyone, suspect, victim, or any number of other people who passed through at any time. That ambiguity is precisely why this kind of analysis matters so much. In a case where digital forensic evidence has been described as limited, where there is a clear lack of video evidence, where the digital trail has not produced the kind of leads that modern investigations often rely on, physical biological evidence becomes not just important but potentially decisive. Walder has also been pointed about the investigative decisions made in the early weeks of this case. And this is where the story takes a turn that the online community has not let go of, because it should not let go of it. The hair is reaching the FBI now. 2 months after Nancy disappeared. 2 months after investigators first processed that scene and collected whatever evidence was present. 2 months during which this hair sat in a chain of custody that was not equipped to do what Astrea Forensics does. FBI sources had reportedly expressed frustration, documented, sourced, real frustration, with their limited access to DNA evidence in the earliest weeks of this investigation. Walder, speaking from her background as a former FBI agent and intelligence officer, did not soften her assessment. In a case of this nature, where biological material is suspected at the scene from the beginning, that evidence should have gone to the FBI immediately. Not to a private lab in Florida. Not routed through the standard channel. Directly to the FBI from day one. The assessment of what the alternative decision cost is stark and specific. Approximately 11 weeks. 11 weeks during which the hair sat outside the reach of the technology that might read it. 11 weeks during which the Guthrie family waited. 11 weeks during which whoever took Nancy continued to move through their life undisturbed. 11 weeks during which the most advanced rootless hair analysis in the world was not being applied to the most promising physical evidence in this case. Not because the technology did not exist, not because the FBI was unavailable, but because of a decision made at the county level in the first days of the investigation. Sit in that. Because it deserves more than a passing mention. 11 weeks is not an abstraction. In a missing persons case, which this remains because Nancy Guthrie has not been found, every week carries a weight that closed cases do not. Every week is a week that the trail gets colder in every dimension that is not DNA. Every week is a week that digital evidence degrades, that witnesses' memories shift, that the urgency driving investigative resources gets competed with by newer cases and newer crises. 11 weeks lost at the beginning of an investigation is not a minor administrative error. It is a significant decision with consequences that the passage of time will eventually make fully visible. The Pima County Sheriff's Office has maintained that the Florida lab is a legitimate and reputable choice, that the FBI has been involved since the beginning, and that the two operations are coordinated. That may be true administratively. But the FBI's reported frustration with their access to physical evidence tells a different story about how that coordination felt from the federal side. And the 11-week gap between initial evidence collection and the hair's escalation to the FBI is a fact that no amount of administrative coordination can fully explain away. The online community following this case has not let it go. And they are right not to. Reddit threads dedicated to this investigation have been running a consistent and pointed argument for weeks. Investigators do not escalate rootless hair to the FBI and invest in Astrea Forensics level analysis on evidence they already have an innocent explanation for. That investment, in money, in time, in federal resource allocation, signals a working hypothesis. That this hair does not belong to Nancy. That it does not belong to any family member or known visitor. That it belongs to someone whose presence in that house has no innocent explanation. That is not confirmed. But the decision to escalate speaks louder than any official statement, and the logic the online community is following is not wrong. What those same communities keep returning to alongside the forensic timeline is something simpler and more human. Nancy Guthrie was 84 years old. She could barely walk. There was blood at the front of her property. A struggle happened. And in a struggle, in close, involuntary physical contact between two people, hair transfers. Through proximity. Through contact. Through the simple biological reality that hair is constantly leaving the human body and landing on whatever surface or clothing or skin is nearby. The circumstances of Nancy's disappearance are precisely the scenario where a perpetrator's hair ends up exactly where investigators later find it. Not because the perpetrator was careless. Because the body sheds constantly and automatically and there is nothing a person can do to stop it. Now the honest accounting of what stands between the hair and an answer. C.C. Moore has been careful not to let the significance of this development obscure the genuine uncertainties that surround it. Not all rootless hair yields the same quality of DNA. The amount of extractable genetic material in a hair shaft varies from person to person in ways that science does not yet fully understand. Some people's hair is DNA-rich in ways that make extraction relatively successful. Others carry far less, and the process produces nothing usable regardless of how many attempts are made. There is no way to know which category this hair falls into until the laboratory tries. Moore has also noted that dyed hair presents a specific and documented complication. The chemical process used in coloring can degrade the DNA inside the shaft, making extraction harder and in some cases impossible. Whether improvements made in recent years have fully addressed that challenge is not yet publicly known. It remains a variable that the laboratory will have to confront if the hair belongs to someone who colors their hair. The first extraction attempt may produce nothing. This is not unusual. Astrea Forensics has worked through multiple attempts on cases before achieving a viable profile. The process is iterative by nature. And even a successful extraction is only the beginning. Genetic genealogy is its own investigation with its own timeline. Months of careful, painstaking work before a name emerges. The total timeline from hair to identification, even under the best conditions and even with priority treatment, is measured in months. While Nancy's family waits. While the investigation continues on every other front. While the person who took her wakes up every morning and moves through another day. And yet, Moore, who has seen this process succeed where nothing else could, who has personally helped solve 6 cases on rootless hair alone, called this the first genuinely positive development she has heard from this case in a long time. Not a guaranteed outcome. Not even a strong probability. A door. A real, open door where there were only walls before. Brian Enton's confirmation of the hair evidence, Moore's analysis of what it likely means, and Tracy Walder's pointed assessment of the investigative decisions that shaped the timeline, taken together, they form a picture that is both hopeful and uncomfortable. Hopeful because the science is real and it has already proven itself. Uncomfortable because the path to this moment did not have to take as long as it did. Whoever took Nancy Guthrie is living some version of an ordinary life right now. They got out of her house. They left her behind. They have been waking up every morning since and moving through their days carrying whatever they carry about what they did. And they believe, the way people who believe they have gotten away with something always believe, that they left nothing behind that can find them. Rex Heuermann believed that. He drove to work. He sat across from his family at dinner. He moved through his days for years after committing unspeakable acts, invisible, untouchable, certain. He had been wrong from the moment those hairs fell and he walked away not knowing it. The science to read them did not exist yet. And then it did. And everything he thought was behind him came forward. In a laboratory in Santa Cruz, California, the scientists who built that science are now being handed the hair from Nancy Guthrie's home. The same team. The same process. The same technology that reached into the past and pulled Rex Heuermann out of his ordinary life and into a courtroom. The science is not the question anymore. It works. That has been proven. The question, the only question that matters in this investigation right now, is whether the hair found inside Nancy Guthrie's home belongs to the person who took her. If it does, the life they have been living since that night is already over. They are simply the last to know it. Because in the end, the most dangerous thing a person can do when they commit a crime is believe they are invisible. Rex Heuermann believed it. He was wrong from the moment those hairs fell. Whoever walked into Nancy Guthrie's home made the same mistake. A strand of hair, falling without thought, without awareness, without any sense that it would matter. It matters now. And they were never as invisible as they thought.